Welcome back to the boathouse. This week, the mock-up for the house top comes off and the actual cedar strip sides go up. And then a big curveball forces a change to the project, at least for a little while.
It's time to start working on the house sides here, now that the port side is all planked up. So we've got a board here that is 1.5 inches thick, and that's the thickness of the decking. So that's going to go like that. And as you can see, the grub or the sill that we made here is a little bit higher than the deck. And then the house sides are going to be made out of cedar that are 1 inch thick by 1.25 inches wide. And these are going to get put up around the temporary house sides here. They're essentially going to act as a mold. And those are going to get laid like that. And then they're going to they'll get epoxied to the layer below them. And then they'll nail down with bronze ring shank nails. And then we'll build up another layer and we'll overlap the corners, kind of Lincoln log style. And then same deal, those layers would get epoxied, they would get nailed. And we're just going to build those up, and that eventually will all get coated with epoxy and more than likely either dynelled or fiberglassed. Haven't totally made up our minds on that yet. And that'll make a one-piece, very rigid house, and the chances of these corners leaking are just about non-existent. So what I want to do first is take this first layer for the house and knock off the corners. So when we have these here, we build the house up. We don't want this to be such a big step, and we're going to cut off right along here and remove all of this material down to the grub so that the house will come down, it'll have a little bit of an angle and a little bit of a drop, and there will be the deck. That reduces the kicking hazard here quite a bit. And it also means that when we caulk this seam, we'll be able to come in with a caulking iron along the house and not having to really try to get in there and be bashing our knuckles and the mallet against the house sides. We'll have some clearance for caulking that seam all the way around the house, which will be really nice. So I just got to mark on here what I want to take off, get these unclamped, and go fire up the table saw. So what these little pieces are is it's the offcut from when I nipped the corner off, and it's the fast cure epoxy. And what this is going to do is when we go put these in the sill, we'll be able to put the clamps on these and have a place that's out of the way of where we need to build. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to clamp on the sloped surface. Once the house sides are done, we can come along with a chisel and knock these off and a couple swipes with a block plane, and it will be like they were never there. So this is always takes a little bit of time, and you gotta wait for the glue to cure, but it's a handy trick from time to time. Another way you can do it is put a piece of paper in the glue line. So usually, like on the lathe, I'll use white glue and put that on, put a piece of like paper bag, some more glue, and your piece, and it'll break right on that bag line really well. But with the soft cedar, and since this is all gonna get sanded and faired and epoxied and glassed, I wasn't really worried if we dig into them a little bit when we take them off. All right, I think it is lunchtime. My stomach is grumbling. I'm gonna go get some grub. We'll let this cure, and then we can continue getting set up to do the house sides.
These layers on the fore and aft, they really need to get bent in real hard in order to fit in. And for one, that's making the joints at the corners a little bit more difficult. And for two, that pressure coming down is going to be squeezing out too much of the epoxy in between them. It's fine right now, there's no issues with it. As you can see, it's really strong. But to make that a lot easier, what we had decided was to get to this point, and then we're basically going to cut a line all the way across to flatten the whole thing out, and then we can build it up just completely flat and straight. So looking at it, there isn't as much reverse camber in the deck as we thought this way. Those long runs seem to be smoothing out really easily, but the fore and aft sections are really an issue. So I'm going to run a string from the two corners over here and see what we got here to try to make that just a straight line. I'm going to do that on the fore and aft section, and then I'm going to run a line from here to aft and see what the deviation is lengthwise. Okay, well, here we go. All level across here and across the front over there. So now I'm just going to set up a line over on these long edges and see what the deviation is and whether we should go a little bit farther than this or not. But looking at it, this looks really, really good, and I think that the long sweep like this is not going to be an issue. And clamping down to the corners here, like yes, they're going to swoop up here, so they won't meet perfectly, but the epoxy is gap filling up to basically a ½ inch, so that's going to be perfectly fine, and we can just clamp the ends. And it doesn't matter what the finished level looks like, because we're still going to cut the camber and we're going to cut the sides to match accordingly, because the sides are not going to dip with the deck. The sides are going to have to be straight from one corner to the other so that the housetop can sit on that properly. All right, so we've got an end on here. And got this right here. So that is our deviation. That is like, I don't know, a ½ inch maybe. I can stick my pinky under there. So I don't think that's worth messing with. It's just more work for something that's not going to help us all that much more. So I think this is all set to get back to gluing strakes on there, or laminations on there. And once we get it up, we get to cut it out, which is going to be really wild to see the deck house like this. got the house sides getting built up, and we got the molds for that put in today. I did say we were going to glue it up, but unfortunately we've got some unforeseen circumstances. I've got some family that isn't doing so well over in France, so I'm going to have to take off again, and not really sure when I'm going to be back, so I'm going to hand it off to capable hands. So the videos might change just a little bit in terms of how they're shot, but I'm sure that they're going to be great. They did all this last summer as well. And the hope is that I'll be back as soon as possible, but we're not making any promises as to when that'll be, but work will continue.
Yeah, it's a real bummer. But you know, everyone's got family. Family's very important. We only have one of them. And so we are super happy that we're able to support Alix and that he can go and spend time with the family and get things taken care of and be where he really needs to be right now. And we will be here waiting for, you know, whenever that situation is done and he's ready to come back. So in the meantime, I'm going to do my best to fill his filming shoes, which are some very, very big shoes to fill. But we're upgrading some equipment for me to use, so it should be a bit better than it was last summer with just the GoPros. And on a little bit of good news is Carolyn will be back soon. She's actually supposed to show up tomorrow, but her car exploded on her in Philly. So she had to scrap that and get a new car, and you know how that whole rigmarole goes. So we're hoping that she'll be here in the next few days, and I'll just be flying solo for a couple days. But thankfully, she's able to come in and help us out, and yeah, that's the sitch.
I thought now would be a good time to show you some relaxing video of Steve rubbing finishes on different wood types. Starting with some denatured alcohol here to clean things up. Like Steve said, he's picked up some new filmmaking equipment and hit the ground running, and we'll ask for some patience while we work out a few glitches and such as he's learning to use the new gizmos.
You're a very loud drinker, Akiva. So these are all samples for the interior. As we're getting closer to putting in bulkheads and putting on trim, I really want to see what our options are for woods and what looks good together and what we want to use where. So what we have here is sugar maple, black walnut, cherry, cherry burl, white ash, and white cedar. So these have a coat of the varnish sealer on them. We'll do another coat when this is dry. And then I'm gonna put a couple of coats of this satin gleam on there. And we can use those in the interior to put against the oak bulkheads and the locust deck beams and see what looks good. And I've got a bunch of Total Boat wet edge paint here. So we've got all 6 of their whites. And we're gonna put that on the cedar and see what that looks like. And we can kind of play with these with the interior as we slowly start to build things out and see what looks good and what we want to go where.
Fortunately, Steve's girlfriend Robin was able to come out and help finish gluing up the rest of the cedar strips. And that's her dog, Radar.
I hope Alix has a good flight.
I know.
I hope there's no screaming babies. Oh, I just jinxed them.
You're a horrible friend. Why would you say something like that? He'll have a great flight and he's gonna get to eat all the pastries.
Yeah. I hope he gets to enjoy it even just a
At
little
least
bit.
a silver lining, right?
Yeah, tiny little bit.
I hope his dog's okay.
It's not the most stimulating process, but at least it's simple and easy, huh?
Yeah. Meditative.
Kind of meditative, yeah.
Just kind of get into your little seat.
So that one, I hit the nail below it, which is why the head folded over. So I put that one next to it. It's not a big deal. You'll never ever see it. Except in this video. There we go. Yeah, about there. Yeah, it's amazing how Akiva's just like, okay, Radar, whatever you want.
Maybe it's like a respect your elders thing.
Maybe. Or he's just like, you're so small that I could just kill you.
Don't even blah.
You're small and old and deaf. You need the dog bed more than I do.
I think he is. Basically giving up his seat on the train for the old man.
Yeah. Yes, you don't really have to worry about that kind of thing. That would have left a dent in the cedar planks.
It would have. Significant.
Cool. Well, that was easy.
Before committing to the lines drawn from the top of the mock-up, Steve wanted to make a couple of beams to get a better sense of the headroom. The more inches that could be made up by coming down just leaves more room for the tender that will ride on the roof, underneath the boom for the mainsail.
Is this essentially a test piece, making these two cuts, or?
Yeah, I just want to have a board that we can kind of stick in there and see. And then I think later there's going to be some corner pieces and stuff that get put in, so the actual beams we make might have to be a little bit different shape. A couple little knees are going to go in, so we got to like kind of factor those in. Right now I'm just really trying to figure out what it feels like in there with the beams, and if we can drop that house an inch or two.
I'm on.
That looks pretty good. I mean, it feels good, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like,
Yeah.
you're not, you know,
Right.
and then you'll have a little more room between the beams.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, any more than that is kind of cramped, and you may get someone taller than me in here, so yeah, most likely. Sure. And just, moving stuff around, having to carry stuff out, or lifting stuff up, right? This just feels good. I think this is really good. Cool.
The last step before buzzing off the top of the house was to drill for the bolts that will fasten the whole thing down through the sill and the deck beams. Casey was on hand to check the angle of Steve's drill bit from the side.
More wet. Look forward to you. Good.
Next week, work soldiers on as the new housetop sides get faired and Arabella receives her first bit of interior paint. Thanks for watching. Give us a thumbs up if you like the video, and don't forget to check out the Patreon page if you're looking for another way to follow and support this project.